KLTV7's JD Conti has more tonight from an East Texas neurologist and a man living with this disease.
My purpose is to tell people about Lewy body dementia, the most common disease that nobody's ever heard of. I believe I'm serving my Lord and Savior while I'm doing it.
Welcome to the Dementia Doctor. Today we have Mr. Kent with us to talk more about Lewy body disease. But before we go any further, could you let us know a little bit about yourself, sir?
Yeah, my name's Don Kent. I was born and raised here in Tyler. I went to public school system here, went to Baylor University and got an undergraduate degree, and then went to the University of Houston Law School, got a law degree, and practiced law up until the end of 2017 after receiving my diagnosis in March 2017 at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota by Dr. David Knopman.
And as I know about you, I've heard that this was quite a diagnostic odyssey for you to find different neurologists. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yes, it was. Dr. Knopman was the 7th neurologist I'd seen. I'd seen my general neurologist here. I then had a heart issue and ended up with a pacemaker, and that helped some, but then my cognition was still not good, and so we were referred to a neurologist in Dallas at the Neurologic Institute there, and I was seen by them and told I did not have Alzheimer's, which I thought that meant I didn't have dementia at the time. Yes. I didn't know there were that many different forms of dementia.
Yes.
But they wanted to do a neuropsych test, and my insurance company would not do the full 4-hour neuropsychological test and pay for it in Dallas. So it was going to be scheduled 7 months when I got back to Tyler. The first time they could do it would be 7 months. And I saw a neurologist in New Orleans. I had a passing out event at a restaurant there, and a neurologist looked at me and said, there's nothing that they see wrong with me. And again, they thought it was a heart issue, and I saw multiple other referred neurologists, and they told me either I had nothing wrong with me or it was all psychiatric, and I just needed to see a psychiatrist. And I became suicidal, and that's when my internist and my wife said we need to get Don in the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, that's certainly such a difficult story to share, but thank you for sharing it with us. What were your early symptoms? You said you saw 6 neurologists until you saw the 7th one and who gave you the right diagnosis. I'm very curious, what were the very early signs where you said, this is something unusual, I need to see a doctor?
Well, it was, I was a lawyer, and what I did for a living was try lawsuits defending doctors, hospitals, and nurses, and I got to where I couldn't do my job anymore. I would try and get up on the medicine and read the medical journal articles and that were on point for whatever issue I was facing, and I got to where I just couldn't intellectually function. I couldn't hardly even read the abstract. You know how there's an abstract on the top? I got to where I couldn't even read the abstract, much less the details and then the the citations, and for which once my mind just wasn't working, and I described it to doctors classically. Some days I'd wake up and I'd be fine, and I go, oh, okay, and then the next day I would wake up and I couldn't function enough to like heat my coffee in the microwave. I just cognitively didn't know what to do, and I woke up once and didn't know who my wife was. I also had what I call then was a lack of sense of taste, but I learned it was taste hallucinations, and that's been with me from the beginning. And there are times where I could put a piece of steak in my mouth and a jalapeno in my mouth, and I couldn't tell the difference other than from the texture. But I wouldn't take. They would taste the same to me.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of people, when they think about dementias, they think about memory problem, like, oh, someone will tell me something and I'll forget it and I might repeat it. But Lewy body dementia or Lewy body disease has more executive function problem, attention problem. You give a very classic and clear picture of it. You're having this attention problems like reading an abstract which might be about maybe 10, 15 lines, but to be able to have attention, or how do I make coffee, things like that, planning, decision making. With your work, I would assume it needs a lot of attention and a lot of multitasking, and it makes sense that that was the thing that made you seek attention for the doctors.
The interesting thing, one of the interesting things is not one neurologist asked me about my sleep.
Yeah, tell us more about that.
Until Dr. Notman did, and he asked me a question, said, have you ever fallen out of bed? And I said, no, but I've given my wife a black eye, and then I learned about a classic symptom, one of the diagnostic criteria symptoms for Lewy body dementia is REM sleep behavior disorder, and that's acting out your dreams.
Yeah.
And I'd actually had that going on since I was probably in my late 40s.
Yes.
And so it had been some years, and it was 64 when I got my diagnosis from Dr. Notman. So,
Yes, sir.
but not one of them had asked me about sleep behavior, and until Dr. Notman.
Yeah, Lewy body does kind of have these unusual features. The sleep behavior can start as early as up to 2 decades before the disease. And sometimes there are about 75% individuals who do have these behaviors and then they do develop Lewy body, but the rest we think that they might just have isolated REM sleep behavior.
Yeah.
But such an important core feature. Even the other core features are so difficult to understand and ask in the clinic. So some of the other core features is seeing things that are not there, or having an illusion, or having hallucinations, which you brought to light. Yes, we have people who have visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory hallucination. This is actually, one of the rare times that I'm hearing about a taste hallucination.
Yeah, it's pretty odd, I think,
Yeah.
and that was a confounding thing, I think, too.
Yes, yes. I know the other aspects of your life, how hopeful you have been through this journey, how you have shared your information to help other families and patients reach to care earlier and hopefully have access to care which you finally got earlier. One of the things that strikes as a very hopeful part of your journey is the way you have worked on your physical strength. I know you've worked to reach the Guadalupe Peak and you've achieved that.
Yes.
Tell us about that journey.
Well, as my wife said, never in our, at that time, 48 years of marriage had I ever talked about climbing a mountain, and all of a sudden there were 2 national parks in Texas. We'd been to Big Bend, so I said, okay, there's another national park, and it's Guadalupe Mountain National Park. Oh, what's at Guadalupe? Oh, the top of Texas.
Okay.
And so I said, I can do that. So I was already physically active, but I was mostly lifting weights. So I started shifting to walking and still lifting weights. And I walked over 1,000 miles. I went to REI in Dallas to buy the gear and talk to people that had done the climb to the top of Texas, and I asked them what I needed to do, and the first thing that they said to me was, number 1, you need to lose 100 pounds. Number 2, you need to walk 1,000 miles.
Wow.
And I did lose 91 pounds before I went from where I was. And when I went up the mountain, I'd lost 91 pounds from where I was, and I had walked over about 1,200 miles, including doing a hike up one of the Shenandoah Mountains.
Wow.
I had 2 of my 3 sons went with me, as well as my social worker on my case.
Okay.
And actually 8 of us started, but only the 4 of us made it to the peak. So I trained and learned very much how important exercise was. was, and I continued to exercise pretty vigorously up until recently. I've had some setbacks, but I still trying to get back to where I was on that.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And one of the features we know is stiffness in the body. And I know you've described it earlier where you said when you were getting down from the peak, the other feature is the depth perception, which was kind of, it's it's like people who don't have Lewy body don't think about those challenges. So it's that, it's an extra challenge for an individual to do when you have the condition. And so has the exercise helped you with your balance and the stiffness a little bit?
Well, it did. At the time that I went up the mountain, I had symptoms of Parkinson's, but I did not have a full diagnosis of Parkinson's. But then I did get diagnosed with Parkinson's, and but the depth perception, it took me longer to get down the mountain than it did to get up it. It took me basically 6 hours to walk up the 8.2 miles with a 3,000 foot elevation change. But it took me 5 hours, and it took me 6 hours coming down.
Yeah, no, I looked it up before coming. It's 7,581 feet,
Yes.
right? That's the exact height. And I said, "What? You did that?" This is inspiring, right? In the face of having a condition, but saying, "What's the other challenge I can do? How can I keep myself active?" So this is really helpful for most of our families. One of the other things that I wanted to touch upon was, what are other things that you reach out for, faith or any other thing that you feel has helped you with?
Well, two things. One is after I was diagnosed, I wanted to talk to someone that had the disease, and I contacted the Lewy Body Dementia Association, and they referred me to a man named Robert Bowles. And I talked to him, and he's a great man. He died from his Lewy body dementia a couple of years ago, but he lived over 10 years with it, which is pretty rare. But he talked to me and said, "Okay, what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I'm a lawyer." He said, "Do you sit behind a desk and write contracts?" I said, "No, I tried lawsuits. I've tried over 100 cases to jury verdict, including one televised live on court TV nationally." And he says, "So you speak?" And I said, "Yeah, I love to speak." And he said, "What did Dr. Nautman tell you when he diagnosed you?" And I said, "I know where you're headed." He says, "It's the most common neurodegenerative brain disease that nobody's ever heard of."
Yes.
And he said, "Do you want to help me change that?" And I said, "Yes." And so I began speaking. I've spoken at medical conferences. In fact, there was the International Lewy Body Dementia Medical Conference has been held once during my time in the U.S. That was in 2018, and the two people that had the disease that were asked to speak were Robert Bowles and me. And he and I became good friends. He gave a speech called ASAP, Acceptance, Socialization, Attitude, and Purpose.
Okay.
To live best with Lewy, you have to do those things. You have to, and he inspired me, and then secondly, he was also what I am. I'm a Christian. I've attended First Baptist Church here in Tyler since I was born, basically. And I'm still active in the church and my faith, and I believe actually God's purpose for me, I thought, was to be a lawyer, but I think he was preparing me for doing what I did when I'm speaking to people. My next major speech is I speak to the first year medical students at TCU.
Oh, congratulations.
And that's coming up July 1st, and so I'm still continuing to speak.
Yeah, and one of the ways I actually found you, I have to share with everyone, is that I was wanting to make a video on Lewy body. So I went on YouTube and I just typed Lewy body dementia. And guess who came on the top? It was your lecture. I believe you had lectured at the UT School of Nursing. And that lecture came up on YouTube. And I said, okay, I'll listen to this lecture. And it seems to be someone in Tyler. And then I asked around and I found through Alzheimer's Alliance that you were here. And you are very, very, it's close to your heart to raise awareness for the condition.
It
So
is.
we so appreciate it. In fact, just the last week, I had a family who came to see me, and they said, we saw your video with Mr. Kent, and we found you, and that's how they came to the clinic. So all our little and big efforts are adding to help other individuals. What are your suggestions or advice to family who are looking to find good care for themselves?
I'll go back to Robert Bowles, and you got to get an accurate diagnosis. And it took me a while, but during my medical career defending doctors, I'd been to the Mayo Clinic and taken depositions of doctors up there, and I knew when a doctor at the Mayo Clinic in their neurology section on dementia illnesses told me I had Lewy body dementia, I knew, so acceptance to me was fairly easy. But you got to accept your diagnosis. You got to continually just stay socially active, like through my church and through all the support organizations. I go to several live support groups here in town, and of people living with some form of dementia. Attitude, the best you can, stay positive. I mean, you got to accept the fact that you can't do the things you used to do. I had to accept the fact that I couldn't practice law anymore. And I also gave up driving very quickly because I was going around speaking publicly about, at this time, I'd started having visual hallucinations as well as sound. On my own, gave up driving because I didn't want to be responsible for having a wreck. And attitude, staying positive, and then the purpose. Everybody's got to find a purpose. Mine was education about this disease. So.
Yeah, no, it's such a delightful idea, the ASAP. I mean, I've heard this before from you, and I've thought about it for all those things, having acceptance, socialization, attitude, and purpose. Yes, those are wonderful things for anyone to practice, but especially in face of a disease that feels like an uphill battle to kind of fight against. Would you have any other parting messages for our audience?
Again, I'll stress my faith is always there with me. I feel like God's called me to do this, and that's fulfilling to me to know that maybe I'm helping somebody.
You are. Yeah. You absolutely are. I can tell. But thank you so much for coming. I think this is going to be a very, very different and helpful episode for our viewers, because very often they hear from me, but they don't hear from someone who actually has the disease and has fought firsthand with the disease. So we're very grateful that you're here with us, sir, today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.